feels like things have changed. The whole world's changed. Yeah. Now, who amongst you is betraying me?
The anticipation for the release of Red Dead Redemption 2 was palpable, and where many were excited to play the game, I believe that many were excited to experience it. It may sound like the latter of these two statements is just simply a more pretentious version of the former, but I believe there to be a significant difference, and it boils down to how the player responds to the mechanics of the game. In the last couple of decades, we've seen a significant change in the delivery of narratives in games. The simplicity of moving through a level with the highest score achievable is no longer such a focus, at least not by AAA standards anyway. Instead, we are frequently treated to a sequence of events that are designed to move you or engage you in a more filmic sense. Being a fan of film, I'm happy with this new direction that games are taking. However, I'm not blind to the obvious drawbacks tied to this style of storytelling as well. Developers understand that a player can feel more engaged with characters if there is significant character development. To accomplish this, it's becoming more common for us to be subjected to scenes depicting a character's downtime, demonstrating to us that the lead protagonist is more than just a sword or gun-wielding maniac. By providing more context, a window into a character's life, the humanizing aspects show through, allowing us to connect more and show empathy. When executed correctly, the player can feel a far greater connection to the characters on screen, making each given scene either more intense, traumatic, or emotional.
I miss you.
I miss you too. It's all in the past now.
The question is, do games need to take on this persona as an interactive film? Should a game be cinematic? Should it be experienced? Or should it simply be played? Once upon a time, this is the type of entertainment we were provided with. The topics of pacing and character development were void of all conversations related to video games. This makes total sense. It would have been very difficult to portray Pac-Man as a character with a complex character arc, faced with moral choices in such a restrictive era of technology. If Pac-Man were to be reinvented by a typical game studio in this day and age, we would probably see a very different depiction of a simple arcade classic we're used to. I can almost see the multiple occasions of when exposition would be forced down our throats so that we can establish a greater level of synergy with what will ultimately become a troubled and vengeful main protagonist. The potential issue with having this exposition is that we would have to experience Pac-Man's tumultuous past in order for it to have any true gravity, and for every second we're experiencing Pac-Man's character development, we aren't able to actually play the game, and that's where the main point of contention lies. Games are supposed to be played. I'll use another example, and this time without the comedic value of Pac-Man as a complex character.
It's rare. Lily white coat, the pelt to more and cover what I owe.
If I'm skinning anything, I'm skinning you, boy.
Please, I'm out of work. It's the only way you'll get paid, and all the hard work's already done.
Fine. Move.
Red Dead Redemption 2's Arthur Morgan is an excellently crafted and morally ambiguous character. We learn this via hundreds and hundreds of lines of dialogue, hours and hours of cutscenes through pages and pages of text. Even when travelling from A to B on whichever mode of predetermined transportation you're allocated, you are still effectively being forced into more exposition. It's just this time it's hidden behind so-called gameplay. You can even make the switch to cinematic mode, relieving you of any real gameplay at all, and instead simply holding down a button. For all intents and purposes, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game, and where the gameplay can be brutal, immersive and varied, there is also an abundance of what I wouldn't traditionally refer to as gameplay. Watching Arthur skin a deer, cook a steak or even take a bath are just a few examples of what the game shows exquisitely well, but all in the aid of creating an atmosphere. The playing part is seemingly missing from the equation. I'm coming across as complacent and dismissive of the ridiculous amount of hours that Rockstar put into creating one of the astronomically impressive games of the last decade. The level of immersive detail also applies to plenty of other fantastic titles, but I would argue that Red Dead Redemption 2 takes this design to a whole new level. Once again, if we look back several years, we can see these scenarios play out, but in cutscene form. This would also likely include an option to skip the cutscene as well. What developers are doing by making you play out these actions is keeping you engaged, making sure that you feel like you have control over what's happening in the scene. If you're not a fan of the style of gameplay where you're forced to use the mechanics to make the world feel more believable, then I feel for you. I really do. From what I can tell, this is the direction that many games are going in, whether it be forced exposition delivered in slow-moving quests, or patiently waiting for a button prompt so you can move along the story. If we look at the journey of Uncharted, you can see the gradual evolution clear as day. Even infamous Second Son does this to a certain degree. And although I haven't played the latest God of War installment, I can safely assume there will be plenty of occasions where the game will force me into a slow-moving section so that Kratos and the boy can develop their characters. For many, spare time is a commodity that rears its head all too little, and so when the opportunity to play a game arises, watching Arthur take a little boy on a fishing trip may not be their idea of living the life of an outlaw. Of course, there is no shortage of excellent games out there that favour games in a more traditional sense, and by traditional I simply mean prioritising gameplay over what each character feels on an emotional level. But when the game you want to play is laden with evocative scenes like this, I can't help but sympathise with those that want to simply wreak havoc in the Wild West. It's becoming the norm for developers to produce narratives that we can become heavily invested in, and for characters to either be relatable or flawed, in the hopes that we can connect with them on a deeper level. The days of high scores and relentless action are being pushed aside by new technology able to accomplish these more cinematic and emotional games. The anger in Arthur's eyes, the madness in Dutch's are both examples of how games are bridging the gap between something we play and something we experience.